I want to get back to that legacy and how long it took to sort of how long it takes to sort of get past that legacy, I guess. But before we do, I want to remind people that the one of the big controversies, or I don't know, maybe that's even too soft of a word. There was questions of the Hatch Act, I believe. The mass firing of AUSAs around the country, the politicization of the attorney generals I should say, the U.S. attorneys in different states came out of that notion of voter fraud, right? I mean, so guys like Hans von Spassky, I can't pronounce his name, but
Bukowski, yeah.
yes, Bukowski. He was, I remember, testifying quite a bit at that time, and was sort of instrumental in making, giving the predicate to fire some of these U.S. attorneys. Is that right?
Right. I mean, so this was all very closely connected. So the U.S. Attorney scandal was, when when the top level political staff at the Justice Department in the Bush administration put a lot of pressure on the U.S. attorneys, who are the people who represent the Department of Justice around the country, put a lot of pressure on the U.S. attorneys to go out and find cases of voter fraud and prosecute cases of voter fraud, because they had created, von Spakovsky and others had created this narrative that there were all these people who were voting fraudulently, and of course these people were people who were supposed to be members of minority groups, people in urban areas, people who vote Democratic, and they were all voting fraudulently was the narrative. And so the message went out to the U.S. attorneys: go out and bring these cases to kind of prove up the narrative, and they couldn't find cases, right? Because voter fraud is something that happens in America, but extremely, extremely rarely. And the kind of voter fraud that happens is basically almost never the kind of voter fraud that folks like Hans von Spakovsky they're trying to attack with things like voter ID laws. And so these U.S. attorneys, who were all political appointees of the Bush administration, these are not liberals. These are folks who are Republican political appointees, went out and said, I can't find the cases. The cases don't exist. And the line came down from the politicals in the Justice Department and Main Justice and in the White House. Well, then we'll find some new U.S. attorneys who will bring these cases, right? And that became a major scandal, because you're not supposed to politicize prosecution. And that was very closely tied in. And again, the Office of Inspector General and Office of Professional Responsibility at DOJ issued a number of reports finding this, that was very connected with the politicization of the Civil Rights Division, of hiring in the Civil Rights Division, of efforts to try to purge voter rolls instead of ensure that people could register to vote. One of the issues a lot that, again, this is sort of the effort to prove up this right-wing narrative that turns out not to be based in fact. The right-wingers who had criticized the Civil Rights Division for years had said, well, look, they're just a bunch of racists. They're a bunch of reverse racists at the Justice Department, because they'll only go after white people who discriminate against black people in voting, but they won't go against black people who discriminate against white people in voting. And so that led to this effort, this sort of Moby Dick effort, to go out and find some case where black public officials had discriminated against white voters and bring a Voting Rights Act case against them. And they worked really hard, and they devoted a lot of resources, and they found this one case in Mississippi that they tried to death, and eventually proved a voting rights violation there. Meanwhile, there's all this other voting discrimination that they let go by the wayside. Even a conservative Supreme Court said, how could you have allowed this voting discrimination against Latino voters in Texas to get past you? Even a conservative Supreme Court found that they just hadn't done enough on the kind of traditional voting rights enforcement. And the reason for that is because they were out looking to try to prove up these right-wing narratives. I think the concern now is, they all know, the folks who are coming in with the Trump administration know exactly where all the bodies are buried. They know exactly what they need to do, and they can get right on subverting the Civil Rights Division.
Hey, it's Sam Seder. Why don't you subscribe to this channel? You can do so right over here. Some over. Subscribe.